Yeah.
brings the potential damage to the environment in the future, or you look for other renewable energies or sustainable energies that allows you to have like a very, very long run in the future, and that replaces the how do you say that? The need for the oil, which will reduce the supply,
Mm-hmm.
and then the oil business will die down, which means companies as we just talked about, BP, ExxonMobil, and Shell, all of those companies, they're going to suffer a lot, and they do contribute a lot to the American economic system, especially for states in the South like Texas, Louisiana, areas like this, and you know, also like the war that we fought in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that was done there. It's all for the oil. And,
Oh, sure.
you know, like
Yeah.
all of a sudden you've got no oil left, and you have no need for oil. So it's not only just gonna bring like economic impact. It's also going to be like worldwide political impact as well. So it might bring the world more peace because the soldiers of America are going to come home and stop fighting for oil, but you know, they're also saying they're going into those countries in the name of human rights and also protecting the governments and their democracy. So,
Yeah.
but we don't know that for sure, obviously. But some people think it's completely for oil. Some people think it's just really for democracy and helping them out.
Sure.
As their dictatorships and everything.
Of course.
You know, you can't run a democracy in every single country in the world. It's impossible.
Good. Okay. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
these are all good points.
Just a quick thought, you know. So.
Yeah. So, look, guys, all of this stuff we're talking about right here is becoming increasingly important in business, and right now, it's at the cutting edge of all the big discussions in business. Is sustainability, development, and sustainability at the same time. And it's a really hard process. So, for instance, the clean energy companies have had this huge boom on Wall Street over the last 2 or 3 years. They'd muddled along for a while, but there's been kind of a gold rush style stampede into clean energy companies over the last 2 or 3 years because they're seen as the future. Renewables are the future is the thought. And I'm sure that that's correct. But at the same time, there are all sorts of wrong turns and also all sorts of shysters who come out of the woodwork whenever this kind of opportunity occurs. I would say, this is me totally shooting from the hip, 70% of the clean energy companies that are publicly traded have widespread fraud going on right now. And I think a much lower percent of traditional energy companies do. The reason why is because where there is great interest and great hype and a whole bunch of attention devoted to a particular industry, it becomes much, much easier for management to commit fraud. Because management can hype the company, issue press releases, interest people in the company, and then issue secondaries and use the proceeds from the secondaries to paper over fraudulent accounting processes in the company. Okay, so it's a very morally gray world out there. And certainly not all of the good on this topic is on the side of the clean energy companies or on the side of the sustainability people. I just offer the example of the fraud in that industry as an example of this. If you're looking for particular cases, I can cite particular examples too. So I agree with Daniel in that I think that it's very gray, and there are goods and bads that can come from this. Okay, but at the same time, there needs to be a way forward so that humans can achieve prosperity on a widespread basis and also not destroy things in the process. Okay, probably in no other country in the world is this being played out more starkly right now than in China. Okay, in China, there's this huge choice facing the country right now. They have 1.3 billion people there, most of whom have had subsistence level farming existence until recently. Okay, a lot of people are in poverty, and they're trying to elevate 1.3 billion people out of poverty. A little bit less than that, but that's a lot of people. And so China has been really reluctant to participate in things like the Paris Accord and other kinds of global climate change style treaties. Okay, they're really reluctant to do this because they think it's going to damage their development. And they're right, it will. And it will harm the prosperity of Chinese citizens. China is also, though, because they are so committed to development, they are emitting far more pollutants than any other country. Okay, the coal pollutants coming out of China now account for more than 50% of all coal-based pollution in the world. That's an extraordinary number. But it's largely because China sees itself as unable to stop and focus on sustainability and environmental preservation and protection, since it's got this mission of elevating 1.3 billion people out of poverty. So this is a really stark issue. Some way must be found for humans to be able to live in prosperity and for the environment not to be destroyed, because that's what contributes to the prosperity going forward. Yeah, Daniel.
One thing is that the news just came out today that the Chinese president is phasing down coal burning.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Is he really doing it?
According to the news, yes.
Okay.
But I don't know according to him or according to his mind. I don't know.
Sure. Who knows what's really going on? But
I literally just got the news this morning. It's saying like the president is like phasing down from coal burning for like the rest of the year or something like that.
I hope that they really can find a way to do that, because the pollution right now in most central Chinese cities is just out of control.
It's kind of disastrous at this point. What they're doing right now is they're fixing. They're trying to find renewable energies. Like to build a dam in the western China where.
Yeah, the Three Gorges Dam is one of their big projects for that.
I think it's one of the biggest ones in the world, but there's obviously not enough electricity for the whole China to be powered. And unlike America, where America has a lot of land, has a lot of areas to build like windmill farms and solar farms or like nuclear plants. China does not have that because there's only so much land they can provide for people to live in. Half of the country is deserts or.
I actually am struggling at this point with that argument, because there is all sorts of space in Western China for solar power, but we can talk about that on another occasion.
Yeah. So, but they're trying to work it out. It's kind of like a struggle for them right now.
It is.
But it's like in 2008 they had a really bad earthquake in Western China, and a lot of people died. So, which proves that area is not suitable for living.
Of course. Sure.
It's, you can grow farms and stuff there, but it's also in the mountains. There's the rocks and everything. How are you gonna do that? But
Right. So yeah, precisely. So China is actually facing a really difficult situation, and the pollution is so bad there that they could continue, if they continued emitting at their current pace and their current developmental pace, they could just by themselves make the greenhouse gas effects a reality. It doesn't matter if all the Western nations combined stop their emissions and stuff. If China's not on board with Western emissions treaties, like, it happens anyway, because China has that many people and there is that much environmental damage going on in China right now. Okay, but again, they're caught between a rock and a hard place because they're trying to elevate 1.3 billion people out of poverty. The administration, the regime in China also, if I might editorialize just a little bit, they also derive their legitimacy at this point from their ability to continue to provide the people with greater and greater prosperity. And if they don't provide the people with that ever greater prosperity, then they will lose their legitimacy as a regime. So that's me cynically saying that they probably aren't going to stop that train anytime soon. Okay. All right, so Hoffman is of the view that it's a little too far to say that nature is intrinsically valuable apart from all human involvement. Okay, and this is because he thinks that humans are the ones who have morals. And morality is a human phenomenon. Nature is amoral. He doesn't think that it's something that we can find apart from humans in nature itself. And so he's very uncomfortable with saying that the world would be better off with fewer humans, or the world would be better off without business development, or it would be better if humans just stopped entirely using environmental resources, because he doesn't think that it's intelligible to say that nature is a good in and of itself, intrinsically apart from humans. Okay, and that's a kind of a middle-of-the-road position. It's certainly not the dominative anthropocentric position, which says that only humans matter, nor is it the wholly biocentric position, which says that life matters, including non-human life especially. It's a kind of a middle-of-the-road position that says that nature matters, but it matters primarily because of its value to human beings. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to get out of the Hoffman article. Thoughts, comments, questions from anybody? Anybody who hasn't said anything yet? Let's take a quick break then, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll explore the Durr article and also do a case study. Let's read this case together. Let's have each one of us read a paragraph. We'll start with Isabella, and then we'll go around the room. Start on December 3rd.
On December 3rd, 2012, a terrible accident occurred in New York City subway when Kai-suk Hen was pushed off a subway platform by named Davis.
Something. The fewer are actually willing to step forward and do something about it. What are we to make of this as a psychological thing? Yes,
In
Isabella.
psychology, one of the professors said that
Could you speak up just a little bit, Isabella?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in psychology, one of the professors said that people are less likely to react in bigger crowds because they think someone else will do it.
You think someone else will do it? Okay.
Yeah, she used like the example of a car accident. Like, you don't call the police because you already assume that most people are already calling the police, but more than likely no one has. Because they think, oh, the person behind me will do it.
Right, okay. And also, it usually takes some risk to oneself to take action. It would certainly have been risky for people to take action in this case. In the case of Kitty Genovese being murdered outside a New York apartment building in Queens, that would have taken risk as well to try to do something. And where there is risk involved, it's easier to think that someone else will do it. Okay, anybody else? We all would like to think that we would be different, of course. I think that it's precisely this sort of a psychological phenomenon that paralyzes whistleblowers in the cases of Enron and WorldCom and other similar sorts of cases. So many people know about what's going on, and everybody thinks that somebody else will do something about it, because it's actually risky to try to do something about it yourself. Potential retaliation could occur. Yeah, Daniel.
I was just gonna say they might be afraid of maybe strike back.
Mm-hmm.
If, like, say, witness of a murder calls the police and then the murder gets sent out after being locked up or being bailed out, so then, it comes back to stab you.
Sure. Yeah. In the case of corporate cases, there could be retaliation in the form of job loss. In the case of this case, the New York City subway death, there could be retaliation in the form of the train striking you. That's the risk. Okay, or of course, in the case of Kitty Genovese, somebody who's murdering Kitty Genovese could also kill you as well. So there are those risks also. Any other comments on this psychological phenomenon? This is one of the crazy realities, apparently, of human group psychology. Please keep that in mind. Okay, that's a little bit of a random case, but I wanted to do that shortly before we got into the Durr article. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the Durr article. I'm going to start in on page 405. Let me just summarize what Durr says up to that point. Okay, Durr says a lot of environmentalists these days blame Christianity as being the cause of our environmental problems. Think with me for a second intuitively. Why might Christianity be the cause of environmental problems on a certain way of thinking?
Everything is a blessing from God that they're able to use.
God has given us the world. We are now provided with the world and can do with it as we please. And so this is licensed to do with it as we please. Okay, and so that's been a common criticism actually over the centuries, especially vocally stated in the second half of the 20th century as the environmental crisis really got going, as more and more human societies became developed societies with widespread business interests. Of course, while I think that is a legitimate criticism to a certain extent, especially for twisted versions of Christianity, it's of course not what Christianity teaches. You're not supposed to be a steward of nature for the sake of destroying it as you please. Rather, a steward is tasked with overseeing nature for the sake of improving it. His fiduciary duty is to make it as good as possible. Okay, the real Orthodox Christian attitude towards nature, as Durr describes it on page 405, is in a word stewardship. We are trustees for that which does not belong to us. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Okay, and Durr goes on to spend the balance of the article talking about this notion of stewardship and how it threads a kind of a middle path between the view that humans are bad as such and that the natural world is better off apart from humans, and the view that humans can destroy the natural world as we please because we are the only things that matter. Okay, so if you turn the page and look on page 406, we begin to get into this. One of the views that is present in the Hoffman article and that I spent some time at the end of it talking about is the intrinsic value in nature view. Let me read what Durr has to say here. Since the assertion that the natural world has rights we must honor begins with the claim that the natural world has intrinsic value, let us spend a moment on this prior claim. Okay, and he goes on to talk about the intrinsic value of nature view and the balance of that section. Durr is a critic of the intrinsic value of nature view. He thinks that nature does not in itself have value apart from humans lending it value, because he thinks that nature in and of itself is amoral. Okay, but he takes issue especially with biocentric accounts, like on page 408, that do the following. The biocentrists are much less modest. They do claim to know the good of nature. If I may turn the tables on them, I would say they are far more daring, even impudent, in their claims to know the purpose of nature than are traditional Christians. Okay, and the reason why he takes issue with biocentric accounts is because at the heart of the idea that humans, that the natural world would be better off without humans, or that nature is inherently good apart from humans, is the notion that we can discern by looking at nature what the good is for nature. Okay, we can look out at the natural world and we can identify what ought to be done. And this is something that Durr thinks is entirely arrogant and pretentious. After all, to think that we know what should be done is to overlook hundreds or thousands of years of human history where humans have believed that they knew what was best for a particular state of affairs, like the environment or like some human culture state of affairs, and have failed miserably at doing that. Okay, the biocentric view, if taken to an extreme, says that we should limit or even stop development. Okay, not building monuments in the wild. Okay, not doing recreational hunting or fishing. Okay, and it also has fatalistic characteristics. Okay, if you look on page 411, for instance, in the second column, Durr writes, there is one final serious problem with biocentrism, and that is its fatalism. Biocentrists take their cues as to what ought to be from what is, and thus base their views of an acceptable future on what will happen if we let the natural world follow its own laws as far as possible. Okay, and so he thinks that there's a kind of a fatalism that's present that's not morally defensible. Durr is by no means an opponent, though, of environmentalism, and he does think that there needs to be a kind of a personal stance that should be taken, and this is what he says in the latter parts of the article, a personal stance that should be taken by business persons toward the environment that is constructive. Okay, and that's why I included this, this New York City case. Often when it comes to a really big picture issue, like business and the environment, it's easy to think that somebody else should do it. Okay, it's not my responsibility because after all, my doing something will not make a difference. And certainly when it comes to a really big picture issue, it won't make a difference. Okay, but it would have made a small scale difference in the case of this unfortunate person in New York City. It would have made a small scale difference in the case of Kitty Genovese. The attitude that humans often have in groups, that because it's a big group and because there are others who can do something about something like the environment, is an attitude that I think is toxic because it leads to inaction by everybody who's involved in the group. Okay, and although Durr doesn't say that, he does think that there is a personal mandate that we ought to have as business persons to preserve and protect the environment. And so I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Namely that don't just assume that somebody else will take care of this, because sometimes in especially large groups, no one else takes care of it. So each one of us has a responsibility ourselves to do something about it. Okay? Any questions or comments at the end of today's session?